Good afternoon.
Uh, Thank you so much for joining and for accepting our invitation to conduct the session. So everyone, we are going to start our final session. Welcome back. Uh, the session is titled Macroeconomic Challenges and BIMSTEC, which will be conducted by Dr. Vishwajit Nag. Dr. Vishwajit Nag is a professor of economics at Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, New Delhi. With a PhD in economics, he has contributed significantly to the trade policy analysis, regional trade agreements, and global value chain. He has completed number of projects for Government of India and international agencies such as United Nations, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and WTO. Dr. Nag has published articles in number of international journals and also served as anonymous referee to several reputed journals. He has his research and publication focus on the trade policies, India's economic development and integration, making him a leading expert in his field. Now, I would like to request Dr. Nag to start the session. Over to you, Dr. Nag, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. So let me just share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes, yes. You can also put it on the slideshow mode.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. So I need to speak how much time? 45 minutes or 1 hour? Or there's some discussion session after that?
Yes, you can take around 1 hour, no problem.
So, welcome.
Okay. Thank you very much. I hope the participants can hear me.
Dr. Nag, can you, sorry for the interruption. Dr. Selim Rahan, the Executive Director of SANIM is here. I would like to request him to say a few words to welcome you.
Great.
Very nice meeting you after a long time.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and thank you for accepting our invitation. This is actually the last session of our capacity building program, and we are really glad that we got the right person from this region to deliver a presentation
Yeah,
and engage with the
I was away
participants.
and not very sure about the timing, and I'm actually sorry because you wanted me to do it some other day, and back and forth we are trying to fix up the timing.
No worries.
Finally, I
No
got
worries.
it.
So, no, thank you. So, I think, Shurit, have you introduced Dr. Nag?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, then we can proceed. Then, thank you. Look forward to your presentation and
Thank you.
discussion.
So I'm back to the presentation. So I hope it is visible, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's visible.
Oh, okay. The topic which is given to me is basically macroeconomic challenges. Now, when we try to understand macroeconomics, basically as a student of economics, we start with income, investment, um, consumption, export, import, role of government, right? So these are the main variables actually we study in the class. But when we look at the challenges part of it, then actually we go to the next level, try to understand their so the impact of these variables on other variables, mostly socioeconomic variables, such as health, uh, uh, health, maybe inflation prices, maybe climate change, maybe on some other areas like inequality, right? So in this particular lecture, I try to basically cover those areas more because most of the time what happens, we get the macroeconomic data very easily and the participants can do their own analysis how the economy is performing in terms of GDP, in terms of per capita GDP, in terms of investment. So there are a lot of data available. Every country and their National Account Statistics Office actually provide the data. But if you need to like to work on other countries' data, so you can get into World Bank's database, World Bank development indicators. So um, you can get some more information from there. You can also get some more data from IMF International Financial Statistics as well, right? So these are the main databases where from the macroeconomic information so you will get it. Okay. So just to start with, so everybody knows what is BIMSTEC and how BIMSTEC is constructed, and what are the main areas of BIMSTEC cooperation. So I'm not going to repeat those things much because this is the last lecture by this time we have already done. So I have also looked into your the other modules. So one of the most important macroeconomic issues, which is trade. I'm not focusing on that because uh, though I am a trade economist, but I love to talk about trade because I'm sure there are other lectures where actually trade issues have been covered significantly. Okay, let us try to focus on some issues which are very important. And when I did my research, then I found that there are many international organizations also focusing on those. So some of the basics. So the most important thing is 30% of world undernourished populations, which is around 23% total population, uh, are actually living in this particular region. We are contributing very less, 4% of the global GDP. But interestingly, if you look at the map, so we know that it is basically a bit of contiguity is there because countries are connected to each other, and most of the countries are close, but still sometimes we have connectivity is an issue. Direct flight may be issue. Uh, some countries like Nepal and Bhutan are landlocked, so that's also an issue. Okay, so we have our own challenges. As we have our own challenges, so when you're trying to develop a regional cooperation, so you need to focus on certain issues which are very, very common to us. But some of the issues may be country specific also. For example, some issues which Thailand faces, maybe Bhutan is having a different issues altogether. For example, Nepal and Bhutan are part of the Himalayan region. The kind of climate change effect on Himalayan countries will be completely different from ecological challenges of sea rise, which is for Bangladesh, Myanmar, and part of Thailand. So, so that's basically the issue. So, so this is basically you must have already learned. This is a vibrant region and have large population actually, and our structure of the governance are also different. Uh, but this in the friendly neighborhood, we are having a significant increase in international trade, and many countries are already having different layers of free trade agreement. Uh, and interestingly, the countries are basically in a confluence of two major trade blocks. One is ASEAN, in which Myanmar, Thailand are part, another one is SARC, in which India, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka are part. Okay, so together, what another thing we can harness is an important issue. Okay, so but that may be as part of our wish list that what we'd like to achieve, because to achieve these things we need a lot of money, right? Not only just intent, but money is very important. How the money will be spent, whether the country is able to raise that money, from where we get that money, what are the rate of return, and there are many other issues like infrastructure issues. And when I'm saying infrastructure, I'm talking about both physical and digital infrastructure. So those issues I'm going to touch up a little bit. So you already know, because it's a very interesting group, different countries taking charge of different areas for cooperation. And I'll pick up some of the issues from the left hand side, which will actually having a macroeconomic impact. for example, agriculture, um, environmental issues, poverty alleviation, uh, climate change, environmental disaster management, energy. I'm not talking about trade and investment, as I said that this must have been discussed already. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. So first, what I did, I tried to do a kind of a generalization, which may not be right from different perspective, but when I was just looking at uh, the best picture of the country, is that where these countries are standing. So basically, some countries are having uh, good focus on the educational part. Some of them are having huge focus on social security. Some of them are carbon negative, right? More focus on environmental issues. So different countries having a different kind of focus. It's not that countries uh, do not have similar kind of a focus. So some of the economic challenges which I picked up um, are these. So I'll not give equal importance to all of them, but some of them are connected to each other. So like unemployment is an important challenging issue in the entire sub-region. Excessive reliance on agriculture. I think there must have been discussion on agriculture, trade, agriculture cooperation. I'll also talk about that. Balance of payment, current account deficit, expenses management, they are connected. Um, Public debt in financing development is a very important area, and I'm going to focus on that. Related to that is the investment issues, price uh, is pricing and inflation, also an important issue like energy prices, food prices going up, which is having an impact on health issues because food insecurity is increasing in that region. Uh, and then I'll talk about energy and external shocks issues. So first, a quick macroeconomic overview. Um, so if you look at the growth rates, most of the countries are trying to recover. Um, During the COVID time, you must have heard about different kinds of recovery path. Some people said it's a W-shaped, some people said V-shaped, some people said that K-shaped, that each one of them are having different meaning. Like V-shape means during the COVID it will go down and then it will sharply increase, right? And W-shape means initially it will go down, then go up, and then go down, then slowly go up. Okay, K-shape means that after COVID, what happened? Some sectors may grow, and some sectors may find a difficult time. So let us go one by one. That how countries actually had its recovery experience. So V-shape was a wishful thinking that um, assuming as in economics, we assume ceteris paribus, that nothing has changed. COVID has not created a major impact. It is just a lockdown for a few months. And once the lockdown is over, it is business as usual. Everything will become normal. So the economy will come back and it will it will be up and running without having any impact of COVID. But as during the COVID period, we realized that that may not be the case. During 2022, actually, we had a very interesting experience globally. Um, what happened actually, which is very, now it is a jargon, it is being used as a revenge buying. So people are sitting inside house for long. Um, People's personal consumption expenditure has gone down because you are not going to the market, not buying new shirts, not buying new cars, or not buying, not spending heavily in tourism, right? Not traveling. Okay, so as a result of that, what happened when everything becomes normal? People are having more disposable income in their pocket, so they just wanted to spend it. So what happened when the shopping mall opened? We were out, we were no more using mask, so we wanted to buy, wanted to go to different places to experience, as if we are tired of lockdown. So what happened in 2022? Actually, globally, what we found that whatever the fall in 2021, it went up, the consumer demand gone up. So several experts actually warned that this doesn't look like a sustainable demand because world was experiencing some kind of a slowdown from 2010 onwards for various reasons. Initially, there is a European crisis, then there are oil price related issues, then eventually what happened? Uh, there are several international conflicts which were actually having a possible impact. So, the world was not really picking up the investment as well as consumer demand. So we are having slowly normalizing our, whatever the expense of boom period in pre-2010. But COVID actually provided a big shock. As a result of that, when the recovery started happening in 2022, there's a lot of warning that this may not be a sustainable thing. So exactly it happened. This revenge buying spree actually came down substantially, and world has gone into again some kind of a recession. So what happened? That it is like a W shape, as I mentioned, that it came down, it went up, and came down again, right? So now the recovery, 2023 second half onwards, 24 onwards, as being expected, it will be slow. But what happened? Global markets are actually quite, down even now. Uh, Meanwhile, actually, our region is providing a silver lining because all of us actually are growing and having a clear recovery path which has been visible. So if you look at Bangladesh, so I'm not expecting that growth rate will reach to 8% or so. So from 6.7%, 6 to 7% pre-COVID period recovery is actually during 2023 is 5.78%, which is quite robust. Um, Bhutan is also showing recovery. So you can see 6 to 7% are growing. Even India is growing at 6 to 7%. Myanmar, Sri Lanka uh, actually faced a major political challenges. So as a result of that, the GDP got affected. Um, Now, what happened in case of Thailand, which is already a middle income country, so their export market outside ASEAN got affected because Thailand is more open and export oriented economy. Interestingly, if you look at all the countries here, um, all of them are focusing on agriculture. Some of them are in services, like IT services in India or tourism, uh, Sri Lanka and Thailand, and partly in Nepal and Bhutan also. So if you look at very few of them are actually focusing on some products like natural gas and energy. So energy is a big question regarding the sub-region's future. So that's the point I'd like to drive in my coming uh, slides. Um, Income inequality is a major issue. Limited infrastructure, connectivity. So if someone wants to drive from Kathmandu to Bangkok, so he or she won't be able to drive because our roads are not connected, standardizations are not there, right? But as a result of that, our trade gets affected. So infrastructure, is a major issue in all these countries. Uh, of late, what we found out, climate vulnerability as a major issue. Uh, so there's a question on infrastructure. I'll come back to that. Just hold on. Um, so, so that's basically a major challenge because these countries are having large population. So we need to continuously create jobs, and the world market is so far has not recovered as it was expected. So job creation is an issue. So how actually we can create job, whether more investment in infrastructure can create jobs, more investment on climate protection, whether it can also create jobs, because if you just focus on more climate saving technology, so which might require creating new kinds of machines or new kinds of investment, um, like protecting uh, land from the sea rise requires a lot of land development issues, a lot of new kinds of buildings. Perhaps you need to build up near the sea. So these might require a new kind of investment, new technologies, new jobs. Okay, so that's basically an important issue. And energy, as I just mentioned, also an important thing for Bangladesh. Over dependence on garment industry as an export driven thing. Bangladesh is also trying to focus on identify some more areas like low skill dependence on electronics, plastics. So these are the areas where other countries can also think of. Okay. So let's start with the inequality part of it. Uh, so on the left hand side, we put the GDP per capita income. So Thailand is significantly, having higher per capita income, but most of the other countries are close to each other except Myanmar and Nepal. Uh, India is being a very large country and heterogeneous populations, and not all areas are equally developed. So per capita income is just GDP divided by total population. Doesn't say much of those things. But more worrisome thing is reflected in the right hand side, uh, which is basically trying to understand the income inequality. So income inequality has significantly increased in a country like India, because with the growth, inequality is basically comes obviously. Okay, so it's something like that. How we define growth. Uh, when you look at the growth, then there could be a demand side issue, there could be a supply side issue. A demand side issue is that, suppose, for example, I'm a professor, I get X amount of salary. Suppose tomorrow my government decides, no, your salary is less, so you are doing really working hard, so we give you salary Y. Y is substantially higher than X, right? So that means India's GDP will rise because everyone's income is rising, um, and that means we immediately create a demand. So all of us will basically try to demand, try to buy more things, but whether the supply side response are spontaneous or not. Okay, uh, because what happens actually when there are high growth, um, there are mostly from the demand side the growth comes. There could be several hazardous things can happen. There is one question about the environmental sustainability. Yes, that is also true because it is mostly from the demand side. Now, if the supply side are not matching, then what would happen? Then immediately there will be an inflation because more money will chase less number of goods. But at the same time, we need to understand if the money is not distributed equally, if not everybody's income is rising equally, then whatever the goods available will be purchased by the rich people only. So with the growth, it's very natural that inequality will come. So it's very important when there is a growth strategy, you should also have a wealth distribution strategy. Okay, so any countries with the growth, the development strategy should also look into the distribution strategy. And I'm sure there is one question here. It's also must focus on other balancing issues, including environmental balancing issues. You must have heard about different kinds of growth, because growth literature talks about like pro-poor growth. Um, uh, then, uh, then there are basically they want to reduce the regional disparity in terms of growth, or any kinds of divide they want to do. So, so that means a country's growth strategy need to have a good adjective that are good kind of qualification that what kind of growth we want. For example, regional disparity. Okay, a big country like India, we have regions which high in hills, very remotely located, or islands or desert. So not all places are equally flourished like Delhi, Mumbai, or Bangalore. Okay, so what happened when the growth comes? There is no regional, symmetry. So some states will be growing very fast, some states will not be, because you are calculating growth for the entire country. So regional disparity is also a kind of a natural fallout from high growth. So the inequality may come from regional disparity, people who are living in states or regions which are deprived of, so they will be deprived of opportunity, so they will not be able to earn more. So as a result of that, the demand will be coming from only from some regions, and the growth will be reflected and visible only from some places. So that's very important. If you do not have high growth, then you may happen, you may see that that inequality remains at a low level, because everybody's incomes are more or less. So because inequality is the distance between the rich people's income and the poor people's income. If the rich people are not growing, poor people are not growing, it remains the same. Look at the status of Myanmar here. But interestingly, a country like Bhutan, which is able to decrease uh, its so with the high growth relatively, Thailand and India, the inequality is an important issue. Right? This is basically I have derived from the World Inequality Database. So inequality in generally understood from two ways. One, from the income inequality, that who is having more income. Another one from the wealth, that how much assets uh, the people actually possess. So generally database provides you that how much wealth or income the top 10% people actually in the country controls. So I have provided here the income share and the wealth share of top 1% people in the country. For example, if you look at uh, wealth share inequality for Bangladesh has just a bit come down 16% to 12% in last 12 years. But if you look at the wealth share is quite high. So that means rich people in the country controlling almost 25% of the wealth. Uh, Interestingly, if you look at these wealth share numbers are quite high in many countries. For example, look at the Thailand, it is quite high. India is also has increased in last 12 years. But on the other hand, you'll find out income inequality has come down in Thailand. So you need to understand, look at the Thailand, both tables, that income share of the top 1% has reduced from 1% to 9%, but the wealth share has increased from 46% to 48%. What does it mean? That means that the rich people have the opportunity to invest to possess assets. So you can buy land, you can build up house because you are rich. So you are able to access the wealth creation activities very fast. So you can set up a factory, you can have a transport company, or you are able to access land also. So So that's basically the important. But in case of income share also, if you look at a country like Myanmar, which is quite high. So this provides us a situation that, by the way, in case of income share, uh, top 1%, the share of United States, which can be a reference, is around 22%. Okay, so sorry, wealth share, not the income share. Wealth share around 22%. So that means that these countries, the BIMSTEC countries, are having higher inequality as compared to the developed country. I hope you understood that how the growth and inequality are connected. And if a country starts growing very fast, suddenly, uh, and uh, uh, and within 10 years you find out the inequality in that country rises. Remember one thing, the Western developed countries uh, took centuries to reach to the level of development, which country like Japan did it quite fast. China did it faster than Japan, and we are expecting that other Asian developing countries can do it faster than even China. Okay, but we need to have our strategy in place, particularly how we are going to distribute the wealth, as well as how we are going to manage the inequality. So high growth and inequality management strategy must go hand in hand. So that's basically very, very important. So how government must do it? When you are creating new wealth, or when your income is generating, then the government's tax opportunities are also very high. So government can collect a lot of taxes from more economic activities. So as there's one question about how to manage the environmental vulnerability. So environmental vulnerability can also be done through tax subsidy mechanism, because if there's high growth, then if you want to subsidize environmental friendly technology, then you do it quite fast. Okay, so that people adapt to more environmental friendly methods. For example, in India, um, now there is a drive for every household to have the solar panel on their roof. So if you have a solar panel, then actually you'll be able to get a subsidy to buy the solar panel, and in the electricity consumption you get a discount. So there are double subsidies. So I can just interestingly, I can tell you, one of my colleagues, she built up her own house and she was having solar panel, and she also bought an electric vehicle, so which is being charged at home. And she told me that her overall electric consumption is negative. Uh, so she gets the money back from the electricity company. So the idea is here is something like that the solar panel, the amount of electricity is generating, you need to give it to the electricity grid, and you will consume the electricity from the grid. So you need to you need to pay the net amount. When you are selling the electricity, you get a certain price. When you are buying the electricity, you get a certain price. So she is having net benefit out of it. So if throughout the country, if we're able to do it, at least if suppose 30% population in the country in the next few years are able to do it, then there will be substantial less consumption of fossil fuel. And as a result of that, what would happen? Uh, some amount of environmental friendliness can be expected, and we can actually reach to the net zero situation maybe much faster than the time what we actually get for. So this is just one example that when there is high growth and there is environmental vulnerability, so you need to have an equally powerful strategy to balance that particular thing. And it is not that they are in competition, but they can be done in complementarity, so that you can have high growth and you can also have environmental growth. It's not the case that you will not compromise on the growth. You might compromise on the growth on 1% or more than that, but at the same time you'll be able to protect the environment, which is giving you a more value towards life, and and maybe more value to the future generation. Okay, so how government is actually putting these things in the picture is very important in this case. Let's come to the next one, which is unemployment. It's a very serious issue in the region because they are most of these countries are having high population. So we find there is a significant reduction of unemployment in Sri Lanka. Most of the countries are having a downward kind of thing, but still, because as the population is very high, so we have unemployment issue. One important thing I like to highlight here, um, because we have high reliance on agriculture, and most of these countries, the share of agriculture as a percentage of GDP is coming down. So the people who are engaged in agriculture activities, they basically their real income is not rising much. As their real income is not rising much, so you will find out a lot of young people who are caught, or whose family are caught under agriculture. They like to migrate to cities, and when they migrate to cities, they might not get a good job. Okay, and they remain as unemployed, and they will try to do all kinds of you know um, informal work, and in some countries the database may include those. In some countries there may not be mechanisms to include those, so that's basically a major thing. So most important thing in our region regarding the unemployment part is the skill mismatch. So what is happening, the country is moving towards more high-end technology or relatively high-end technology, which require different kind of skill. On the other hand, the country is not preparing people uh, with that skill. So what is required again when there are high growth? uh, so if some amount of subsidies come to the education, especially in the skilling sector, which might actually fuel the growth rate further. So sustainability of high growth may be coming through sustainable manufacturing, sustainable agriculture, and services. So in such cases, what happened? You continuously need to invest on the human capital so that the skill mismatch issues are actually are being managed. So if you might ask me a question that, if the supply side ready, because we are labor surplus economy, and you skill the workers, so the workers are more skilled, but there may not be more jobs because the demand is still low. Uh, so here actually we'd like to highlight in this case, one of the objective of the regional cooperation is to creating regional demand. And how to create regional demand? So you can have a lot of regional public good which can drive a regional demand. For example, regional infrastructure, you can think of the roads connectivity, which might create a new demand in our region, and as a result of that, some jobs can be created, and the skill mismatch. um, uh, a strategy to handle the skill mismatch might create new kinds of human capital which may be used in these sectors. Okay, so unemployment is also an important issue in the region. So here is the vulnerable employment. Vulnerable employment is basically whose employment guarantees are not there. So large number of employment is actually vulnerable, but it has slowly coming down in our region. Next, come to inflation. Post-COVID, again, supply. Unfortunately, I had to change my computer because my desktop was not accepting my phone. Okay, so shifted to my laptop. But actually, in the desktop, I updated my slides, so some of the slides may not be here, but that doesn't matter. I'll speak. Um, so, um, so inflation is also an important issue as our macroeconomic challenges. So, two areas where actually the BIMSTEC need to be very concerned. One is about the food prices, another one is about the fuel price. Okay? So unfortunately, my slides changed because it has the old version. Uh, so, uh, so what I have seen is actually because of the rising food prices, the malnourishment in BIMSTEC region significantly increased in recent times. Okay, so accessibility of the food is an important issue. So that means distribution of the food could be an important thing, and also our dependence on energy import, especially crude oil or refined oil, um, is also very high apart from countries like Myanmar. So as a result of that, uh, what happened actually, our import bill has gone up, our food prices have gone up, so which is having an impact on our prices. Interestingly, the other things also affected the inflation issues. As I just mentioned about supply chain issue. So uh, supply chain is actually got disrupted because of various reasons. That's one. Uh, Many countries in the world, mostly developing countries, have discovered themselves in the middle of a high debt. So public debt management is also an important issue. If the countries are not able to manage the debt part, then what happened? The interest payment actually making a big holes in the fiscal, uh, on the budget part of the government, and as a result of that, government is not able to spend more money in required areas such as food, education, health, and many other issues. Okay, let's come to another very important area, which is agriculture. And here I'd like to argue that our macroeconomic challenges coming from excessive dependence on agriculture, at least in some countries, and we are not having a proper distribution of the agricultural products. So that's also the related issue. Um, Together, we might maybe producing sufficient food uh, or agricultural products for our own consumption, but lack of distributions, non-transparency in international trade, uh, and a lot of trade cost in terms of non-tariff barriers, in terms of procedural issues, uh, not having smooth border crossing are actually having an impact on, on, on the agricultural product uh, trading. And as a result of that, it is actually having an impact. So you can see on the right hand side in many cases, I have written largest. For example, India is the largest producer of foods. It's also a very large producer of rice, exporting it. So is Thailand, so is Bangladesh. Okay. But independently, sometimes what happens, we find ourselves in the middle of deficit, but together we may be having sufficient products. As I mentioned, uh, the share of agriculture in GDP of BIMSTEC countries. Bangladesh, their share has reduced from 17% to 12%. And India remained more or less constant, which is 18%. Myanmar is 22%. It has also significantly reduced, 37% to 22%. Nepal has also decreased 23%. Uh, Only country like Thailand, which is more diversified, their dependence on agriculture is much less. Uh, so other countries, the dependence on agriculture um, doesn't mean that reduction means that doesn't mean that you are reducing agricultural activity. The things that what we'd like to mention here, that the share of manufacturing and services in terms of value, if it goes up, uh, not in terms of volume in agriculture going down. So that means what happened, the agricultural products remain relatively cheaper in the country, which actually makes the food or agricultural products accessible to the citizen. And also what happens in such as a decline GDP share, people need to find out jobs in other sectors like in manufacturing and services. So we need to reskill the people who are migrating to agriculture. That is also one. So if you look at the yield of the selected job, this has been taken from FAO. So you can see among the BIMSTEC member countries and also with Vietnam. So Vietnam is in case of jute cultivation. So Bangladesh and India are the major jute producing countries. But our yield is much less as compared to Vietnam. In case of rice, again, we are much less as in case of sugarcane, we are also much less. So that's a very, very important for us. So we made the Vietnam as the reference country, which is also a small country having significant focus on agriculture, but everywhere they're productive. So when you look at the productivity for the yield part, the calculation part must take into account how much actually you are able to procure from the cultivation and how much we are able to process and how much we are able to transport. So these things are very important because what I presume that in our region there is a possibility of a lot of losses, wastage because of lack of warehousing facilities. So this part needs to be modernized. So agricultural productivity increase requires a lot of technology. So which we are actually lacking. So as I mentioned earlier also, the food insecurity, which is um, coming up as an important issue. If you look at Nepal, which is the blue color bar, so Nepal's food insecurity is rising. Bangladesh food insecurity has come down, but it's stabilized at some part. Look at the green part, which is Thailand. Thailand is also moving uh, towards the insecurity. So, percentage of population, how much percentage populations are actually illegal. So these also provide us an idea about the inequality which is having effect on the food consumption and maybe related to that nutrition. So nutrition level, so if you look at, we wanted to understand in this way, this is a negative way of that. If food security is there, food are accessible, distribution is perfect, um, the poor people can actually access the food very easily. Then also, if the quality of the food is good, then actually what may happen that some of the nutrition related factor, which is by WHO, like wasting, stunting, low birth weight, and undernourishment, so this will go down. So if we can go country by country, so we can look at that stunting is an important area which has been affected almost by all countries except Sri Lanka, right? So this basically, if you look at Bangladesh, India, and Nepal, the South Asian countries are very high. So that means the children are not growing at a very young age because they're not getting micronutrients from the food, okay, which are important for their growth. So that's basically impact of any macroeconomic challenges because in GDP, agriculture share is changing, quality and extension activities and food warehousing and marketing part are not being done properly. So as a result of the food price is high, food is not being distributed, and as it is not being distributed, then the poor people are not able to get the food at a cheaper price. So they sometimes miss the meals, and at a very young age, this is a kind of serious problem for the kids. Okay, let's come to the next issue, which is debt and fiscal deficit. So
this is basically government debt and fiscal deficit member countries. So you can see Bhutan, Sri Lanka, India, Myanmar are quite high. That means that debt as a percentage of GDP or fiscal deficit as a percentage of GDP is quite high. So in case of Bhutan is 1.6%. In case of India is 85%. Fiscal deficit on the other hand is very high in Sri Lanka, India, and Myanmar. Now let's try to understand the financing part. For any development activity, country requires a lot of money. So country needs to borrow or country needs to save. So saving all these countries as they are lower middle income countries or LDCs, so their marginal propensity of consumption is very high. So the country may not be able to save that much. So it depends on investment as well as borrowing, which can be used for financing. But borrowing actually depends on what kind of credit rating the countries are having in last few years. So if you look at Bangladesh, which actually moved significantly. On the other hand, India has decreased its positions a little bit. Okay, so that means, but you need to understand India is a large country, so there is a possibility of large demand. So sometimes the investor may not be looking into the rating part that much, rather than the overall project, how good would be the rate of return they might actually look in. So this is basically in ADB's calculations in 2020. Now, interestingly, part of it that when government tries to get money from the market, so it could be through the borrowing part, right? So the government borrows through creating bond, and similarly, corporate sector can also look for procuring fund through the stock market by issuing bond. Now, interestingly, in our part, what happens actually, the corporate bond market has not really developed. So if you look at the corporate part bond market as a percentage of GDP, which is on the vertical axis, for Korea and Malaysia is quite high. That most of the countries in the region like Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Bhutan are at a very low level, and their government bond as a percentage of GDP is also very low. So India is in the where it is able to borrow a lot of money, but the corporate sector is not able to get that much of money. So corporate bond market is yet to be developed. So what is happening in the stock market? That actually having the not the bond. So government bond is still some success providing, so government can easily borrow from the market. So for your financing development, developing infrastructure, it's very important. So you need to understand these things from a different perspective. It's basically from the Keynesian perspective about borrowing and then spending. So in your national income equation, the government part, which is G, C plus I plus G part is increasing, right? Now, suppose an individual wants to buy a house or buy a car, he or she may not be having that amount of money. So that person goes to the bank and borrows money, and using that money, he or she buys a house. Okay, so for the asset creation, the person is borrowing from a system, and the system is called bank. Now, why the bank is giving money to the individual? Because the bank is finding that my man is credit worthy. So that means a man is not borrowing from the bank, but man is borrowing from his future income. And bank is trying to have some idea about his future income, that whether he'll be able to repay the loan, right? So, so what happens? This is true for country as well. So when a poor country wants to develop, the country requires to develop bridges, roads, hospitals, colleges, universities, port, airport, a lot of infrastructure. So it's much better if the country is able to borrow internally, because then the government will remain indebted to the citizen of the country. Okay, if the financial market is not developed, then what happens? The country needs to depend on outside, so then you have to make an external borrow. Okay, so you might get a lot of overseas development assistance. You might need to go to big international lenders and banks like World Bank, ADB, right? Uh, so many sub-regions in the world, they actually created their own development bank so that terms and conditions are understood locally. For example, BRICS Bank is there, which for funding the infrastructure, BRICS economies. Similarly, European Bank, you will find out development funding bank are there. So what happened if the domestic financial sector is not developed? The government is not able to borrow from the domestic market. So in this case, this picture is very clear that this government and the corporate sector in those countries are not able to borrow properly because financial sector is not. Now, if you just turn your eyes towards the country like Malaysia and Republic of Korea, so you can see that the Korean government is able to borrow significantly, and the Korean corporate sector has also. Look at the distance between Thailand and Malaysia. Thailand is also part of Thailand and Malaysia neighbor, but there is a significant because it's a more mature market, bond market, where actually the corporates and the government can actually borrow very easily. So this particular picture should be there in your mind, that why developing infrastructure is becoming costly for sub-regions, because we are not able to generate sufficient fund internally as we are going out. So we are dependent on outsiders, and as a result, we have to pay a lot of interest, and these interests are actually going out of the country, right? If you are borrowing, if the government is borrowing domestically, then the interests are paid to the citizens of the country. So the money remains. As the money remains, the macroeconomic cycle operates. As the macroeconomic cycle operates, that interest actually being converted into demand, right? Because it will be somebody's income. So that's the important issue which I'd like to highlight, because there's one question in the beginning about funding the infrastructure. So this is an interesting part. Now, one important thing about why in BIMSTEC region we are not having a good institutional structure in terms of funding part, or maybe special project funding part. So one is about the legalities, the legal instruments, the nature of contract, the institutions, and the decision-making process, whether it is a bit informal or whether it is well-defined. Then there are interministerial committee, coordination committee, which are there or not. Okay, so how frequently the people are meeting. So these are very important. And if you look at on this particular table, for BIMSTEC, most of them are across. That means those things are not happening. So that's an important thing, because our regional institutions for financing the development is relatively. Public-private partnerships also very important. Now, if you look at here, in case of India, public-private partnership has done quite well. So contract managements are quite nice, but this may not be in other countries, but still, as far as the numbers look like, they're not bad either. So, so that means that this region is having a lot of focus on public-private partnerships, and they rely on public-private partnerships for financing the development. So one more slide is about the strength and weakness of different different aspects which provide the readiness, whether the public-private partnerships are there. The right-hand side is it is a Likert scale. The left-hand side is the weakest, and the right-hand side is the strongest. So if you look at Myanmar, which is the red color line, are mostly weak in most of these things, which is whether there are law regarding public-private partnerships, whether supporting activities are there, public sector fundings are there, land acquisition as a major issue because land is costly. So if you look at, on the other hand, if you look at say India is strong in several aspects, and not so strong in some other areas. And look at the Bhutan and Sri Lanka. So they are also not good in some areas. But quickly, as I do not have much time, so I just quickly wrap up some other challenges like balance of payment for Bhutan is a very serious. And for other countries also, current account balance as a percentage of GDP changes substantially. I mentioned earlier energy import. So look at India. So energy import is significantly high. So 30% of India's imports are actually energy. But if we're doing a cooperation within ourselves, then energy trading can be fast. Climate change issue. So there are certain important statistics here. So as I mentioned that there are rising sea levels which are having a threat to Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and there are climate change issues up in the Himalayas. So both are important for us. So we have 2.5 million tons of annual carbon dioxide emissions in India, which is highest among the 257 million in Thailand, 92 million in Bangladesh, and Bhutan lead the group of per capita emissions of 3.9 and 2.5 respectively. Their per capita emissions are higher than India's, largely because they are sparsely populated. So when people are not living in one area and spread up, the energy consumption actually goes up. So per capita emissions are up. Okay, so this is a very important observation because of that we need to be ready for managing this factor. So complying with the limiting the global average temperature or temperature rise of this should be 2 degrees centigrade, so it becomes 20. So by mistake. So so we require the expected cost, basically net zero kind of a target. So in South Asia, it will be 1.3%, 2.5%. So if you recall, as I said that, suppose you want to increase your GDP from 6.5% to 8% or 7% to 8%. So you will not achieve 8%, you will achieve 7%, but be able to add that 1% of GDP as a cost to maintain your maintain your environment. So you will compromise 1%, but you will still remain relatively high. So this is the kind of a mix in it. So this I have mentioned. Okay, the last slide about the possible collaboration to handle this macroeconomic. I think there are a lot of discussion much you has already had regarding the trade and investment purpose. That's the primary focus of the BIMSTEC. So we need to continue our thrust on the physical infrastructure because physical infrastructure we are not covered. So we have different ports which are still at a very rudimentary stage. Ports. Can we develop in some areas? Can be one of the pharmaceutical products.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nag, for your insightful presentation. We have learned a lot from your insights. We have some questions in the chat box. Let me read those out for you. The question from Mr. Sheikh Tosif Ahmed is that how can BIMSTEC countries improve infrastructure connectivity, such as road, railways, and ports, to facilitate the trade and reduce the transportation cost?
Yeah, okay. I think I also saw these particular questions and tried to reply during my talk. Okay, so it's basically fundraising within the region is very, very important. Okay, so otherwise, as a region, we need to make a deal with some of the lenders like Asian Development Bank or World Bank, and also the cross-border lending mechanisms. ADB is having a particular mechanism, because when there's a cross-border, which part of the loan will go to which part of the country. So that means, suppose BBIN, okay, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. So there are 4 countries. Suppose we get loan from ADB. So to whom ADB will? ADB will not give this loan to BIMSTEC. ADB will give loan to the national government. So BIMSTEC will be basically an overarching organization to look at the project. So how much loan Bangladesh and India will get it? So Bangladesh and India will get it for their share of the infrastructure. Suppose they're making roads in their part. So only thing is that what BIMSTEC needs to see is basically the border crossing, that whether that adheres to certain protocol. So we need to develop certain protocol for border crossing. So that's a standard fact, a standard policy. Many other parts.
Thank you, sir. So the next question from Mr. Afia Mubakir is that how can BIMSTEC countries balance economic growth with environmental sustainability and social development?
Yeah, I think I've already touched upon this thing, because high growth always brings inequality, environmental hazards, and social inequality. It is very natural because the growth comes from the demand side and supply side doesn't respond immediately. So it's very important that how fast the supply side can respond. So a lot of regulatory modifications, as well as some reforms you need to do it. But at the same time, you need to understand that, as I have just given in my last slide, that for carbon neutral, 1.5% of GDP need to be compromised. So that means if we have 8% GDP target, we'll get 6.5%, and 1.5% will be the cost. So that means to bring back to the environment. So promote more environmental friendly technology, promote more green technology. So there's a cost for that. Companies and the country may not be ready for that. So we need to understand that in how you are going to finance those. So again, it comes back to the finance part.
Sir, so the question from Ms. Deepa Dash is that how can BIMSTEC countries navigate the increasing geopolitical competition between major powers and ensure their own economic interests?
Yeah, it's difficult because what is actually happening around the world, you need to understand whether we are the lucrative market or we are the producers for the developed country. Okay, so first let's see from India's part. So India is a very big market. No big country wants to avoid it, right? So this is a bargaining point. So every country needs to understand that what is the bargaining point on which the country can make a deal. But while doing so, the regional integrity is also very important, because neighborhood policy are important for sustainability, because there are a lot of public goods, regional public goods, which are important. For example, climate change is an important thing. Regional peace and security is also a public good. So I think the countries need to look into this particular part, because there may be vested interest of other countries on this, but we cannot compromise on the regional public good, because that is going to hurt us eventually. And the cost for managing that may reduce our GDP by 1% more.
Thank you so much, sir. So another question from Mr. Ikramul Hassan is that what measures can BIMSTEC countries implement to improve their investment climates and attract the foreign direct investment?
Yeah, the first point is infrastructure. Second point is a lot of reforms in terms of ease of doing business. The one major problem in all these countries is basically land. Countries like Bangladesh, India, getting land is very difficult. So in that case, we need to understand what kind of investment we require. Do we require investment which require less land? For example, service sector investment requires less land. But overall, the investment climate is very important. That how the countries are moving or one become to the other, and how we are learning from each other. That's the point actually. Right.
Thank you, sir. Sir, and a question from Mr. Bhujel is that how important is socio-economic stability for macroeconomic growth?
Yeah, I think I have already answered this.
Yes. So another question from Mr. Sheikh Raisul Islam is that should BIMSTEC leaders consider establishing a development bank like ADB? Would that contribute to realizing the vision of BIMSTEC?
You need to understand one thing, that there are already some banks, development banks. For example, World Bank, Asian Development. So whether the BIMSTEC countries are having extra resource to make another bank, number one. Number two is that you need to understand that complementarity, not substitute. That what else actually this BIMSTEC bank can offer, which ADB and World Bank are unable to offer. Because cost of making a bank is huge, right? So is it worth to have one other? Yeah, I think we lost again.
Sir, we can hear you now, sir.
So I said complementarity and substitute, which are very.
Thank you so much, sir. We have gone through all the questions.
I have a question, Shurit, for
Okay,
Dr.
sure,
Nag.
sure.
So, Dr. Nag, in one of your slides, you showed the credit rating of the countries.
Right.
And if I look at the data, it's mostly around 2020. But in recent years, Sri Lanka and then Bangladesh have also gone through some very intense macroeconomic instability. So what do you think that, in terms of this instability and the way these countries are now facing some macroeconomic challenges, what do you see the kind of future of it? How these countries can get out of this crisis?
Okay. One thing we need to understand, suppose we assume that overall foreign investment in the world is constant. So the foreign investment will always try to find out a place where the rate of return is high. So if you just look at from this perspective, then what would happen? These countries will be deprived of the future investment because investment will go to some other country. But what I feel that many other countries are also not having very high rate of return. The Asian countries, especially the South Asia, is basically right now in the forefront of attracting a lot of FDI because we have all positives with us in terms of growing economies, large population, a large middle class. Okay, so what I feel the current, the turmoil, we need to go through this turmoil because this is the transition the economies. So for some time, there will be definitely a loss of foreign investment. Investment will not come. we need to understand one thing, that investment, whatever investment we had, it should not go back. Okay, if you're able to hold those investment, then definitely this will attract future investment. Maybe after 1 year or 2 years, our ratings will improve when there are stable government and the policy directions becomes clear. We need to understand from the Middle East, because in many Middle East countries actually have gone through a political turmoil, but some of them got stabilized, some of them are not stabilized. So those who have stabilized, they are able to attract and retain the investment. So that's very important.
Thank you, Kunal. Shurid, is there any other question, or we will kind of?
Sir, we have addressed all the questions, sir. So now I would like to request you, sir, to say some in for the concluding remarks.
No, thank you, Dr. Bishwajit Nag. And I know how busy you were, but despite that, I think you gave us a kind of an excellent analysis of the current macroeconomic situation, and you also linked it with some other relevant areas too. I think we all benefited quite a lot from this, and I also thank the participants. You attended 6 sessions of this capacity building program. Congratulations. And we look forward to engaging with you in the future too. Thank you. And with this, we conclude our program now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you,
Okay,
Dr.
okay, bye.
Nag. Thank you all the participants. Hope we will engage with you in further programs. Thank you so much for attending our capacity building.